go back in the other direction. So in recent years, and the Campaign for Youth Justice just reported a couple of weeks ago, we've now had 23 states in recent years actually push back against that trend and make it more difficult in various ways to prosecute kids in the adult system, because, as Tammy said, all of the data is there, all the evidence is there, and it's been there for years. So the models are there, as Marcia indicated. It's an opportunity for New York to win this year and put some change in beliefs. But this discussion didn't just start here, it's been going on for quite some time. So why is it not moving forward? Why does it take so long? Why hasn't it happened? A couple of quick thoughts. Change is hard. It is, and the status quo is just easier for folks, particularly in a bureaucracy and a system like we have. And add to that, get a bunch of lawyers looking at statutes, right? And phones start to happen, right? And so we've got 4 lawyers up here. If you give us a statute to analyze, we'll see you in 6 months, and then we'll have a discussion if we're lucky, right? So change is hard. It can be complicated if we make it complicated, but it doesn't really have to be. But I would suggest that there's another reason that change has not happened. We're just still asking the question, and why this happened across the country, right? And Mary Edelman talked about it this morning, and she says it in ways that couldn't be truer, right? So I wrote it down. Good policy should be like good parenting. Never give up on a child and treat all as if they're your own, right? The reality is, if these policies disproportionately impacted people who look like me, and my son, we wouldn't be having this conversation. This conversation just would not be going on, right? So that's a reality. In states across the country, that's something that we have to grapple with. This is a civil rights issue. The issue of mass incarceration of adults and young people, people of color, is the civil rights issue of our generation. Right? And so we need to call that out and have that discussion honestly. I know, and I can say as a parent, if there was a possibility that my child was going to go into an adult jail, Marion said she'd be the mama bear, I would be the pop. I would fight like hell to make sure that my child did not spend 1 minute in an adult jail. But the reality is, it's very unlikely that it would happen. When Vinnie Schiraldi and I were trying to reform the district's juvenile justice system in our deep end facility, we never saw one white child enter that facility. Now, do folks think that's because no white kids in the District of Columbia break the law? It's not. So we need to really wrestle with these issues, recognize what's going on, but also make it simple, right? And so I'll just direct you quickly. In our packets, the National Juvenile Justice Network has it all laid out through the principles. I think we could probably come up with stuff right there, maybe by the end of today. So maybe we'll put that challenge in.
Thank you very much. It was a good start to our day. We are now... The feedback we got last time we did one of these meetings is you wanted more time to interact. So let's do that. This is our first opportunity to interact with the panel. So we can take questions. I would ask, though, that your questions actually have question marks in them and that they be short and concise. So anyone can get started. There's always a lull before the first question comes up. We have mics that can run around the room. Okay.
This is Danny.
Oh, yes, say who you are, and if you're with an organization, you can say that too.
Hello.
Are we okay?
Is it working now?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Carrie Ward and I work at New York State Supreme Court. And I just have a question. You've all spoken very eloquently about where we need to go. Do you have specific legislative recommendations as to how we can achieve these goals?
Well, I actually think we would all be slightly different. I know that
possibly DA Rice and I would be different. We actually are developing legislation, we're writing it. But I do want to say that along that line, I want to just address one issue, which is the family court issue, and that family court isn't functional. I just want to say that in New York State, we just underwent the single largest juvenile justice reform since I've been practicing and close to home. So despite everything, and despite family court, and despite what people say, we actually did this amazing reform that I think will prove to be significant. But I also want to say that it's not about the building. I mean, people need to stop talking about family court as if the only way to process these cases legislatively would be in family court. You can process these cases using the Family Court Act in any courtroom, anywhere. We do it for weekend arraignment here. We don't process weekend arraignment kids in family court. We process them in criminal. So any legislation that would have to occur, I mean, I would like to see blanket legislation that the Family Court Act applies to all 16 and 17-year-olds regardless of crime. That would be the blanket legislation I would like to see. I understand why that wouldn't happen. But yes, I mean, there would be legislative change, and depending on what you believe and what you need from this, what your theories of what should happen are, your legislation is going to look different. And I think that's going to be a big, obviously, as I believe has been said, a big challenge is coming up with legislation that meets, hopefully, just the children's needs, but everyone else's.
We're going to try to do one answer per question, but if anyone has a burning need, just look at it.
Well, I just want to add, this isn't complicated. There are 48 other states that do this. So whatever you think is unique about your system, it's probably not that unique. And there are lots of other places that I think New York can look, and it could be as simple as simply extend the statute to all kids up through age 17. It's not that complicated.
Another question, please. Where's the other mic? All right. Your name and...
My name is Kay Schoenberg. I was the social worker for the school program in Westchester County Jail and Penitentiary for 18 years, recently retired. Would somebody address how one might approach the counties upstate that are dependent on the prison system for their economy? Also, most of those areas are very white areas. They don't have a lot of people of color, and they're highly dependent on the prison system for their living. How can we approach those people?
Well, we're very lucky to have a governor who is very progressive-minded in this area, and he has already begun to try to figure out, well, first of all, how backward was for New York State to build communities around penal institutions, but that's what we did all those years ago. And now what the governor is trying to do, because state budgets are exploding because we incarcerate so many people, they're trying to do more community-based diversion programs, which are smart. Keeping people close to home, near their support system, makes the likelihood of their recovery better and reduce recidivism. There's no question about that. So one of the things that he has come up with is building these kind of communities around our wonderful institutions of higher education all throughout the state, many of which are upstate. I don't know what the likelihood is going to be. It's an attempt to kind of keep the brain drain from happening. It's also an attempt to kind of bulk up the local communities, maybe in anticipation of closing down more and more prisons. But I think he's begun to take those steps. But look, let's just say the word that no one has, I don't think we've uttered here, politics, right? It's all politics. Ironic coming from me, who happens to be a politician, but I consider myself a public servant first. But these are all political issues. One of the first things I did when I started the adolescent diversion part was I went to two of the senators in my county. Dean Skelos, who runs, up until 2 years ago, ran the Senate, right, for the Republicans, and Chuck Fischel, and I said, look, here's the plan. Don't give me an answer now, because I know your answer is going to be no, right, because that's the knee-jerk reaction. And wait until I come back to you with the data that shows you that this is smart, not just from a human perspective, but from a financial perspective as well. So that's the politics of it.
Another question right here.
I'm Hazel Dukes, president of the NAACP. It most certainly is a civil rights. But I didn't hear anything about how we could go about this. I studied the drug courts. These kids need more than just to be back to parents. Good policy should be a good parent, but we know different in our society. What would we do to encompass all of the needs of the children? I think we need to start that discussion also before we talk about legislation. I think that these kids sometimes need a whole, besides getting them back to school, is there a social worker involved? Is there psychology involved? All of that needs to be done. That's what made our court system, the drug courts, successful. So what are we talking about? Looking at the entire person.
But that's why, I would say that's why I talked about family court and close to home. Because one of the things that New York State has done, right, is it said, we don't want our kids upstate, we want to create a continuum of services that are kid-specific, right, family-specific, and most of our continuum involves families. We understand how to do this in family court, and actually it's the thing, again, that defense counsel most bucks is that family court actually does this. Family court is a court that does look at it's actually more needs-based than risk-based in reality, which is part of our problem, right? So family court looks to address the needs. Close to home was developed to look at what families need, what kids need, what communities need, and how to best serve those communities. And the whole premise of close to home is that those kids don't need to be upstate, right? They need to be in community-based programming that serves their families and their communities. So we have a model for doing that in New York State, actually, and it took years to develop, and it's based on, right, it's based on tons of evidence and data that it works. So applying those same goals towards kids 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 2, 3, 4, is really what we need to do. We have the knowledge here, and as Marcia said, other states also have this knowledge. We are not innovators here, right?
So let me just add quickly that. Let me just agree wholeheartedly, and we talked about the fact that the family court reforms have to be part of this. New York has achieved a lot in recent years, and there's been other states we can look to. So just a little north of here, in Connecticut, we've seen massive reforms over the last 10 years that included significant reforms in the juvenile justice system. My agency, Justice Policy, released a report on this. They reduced the level of incarceration in the juvenile justice system. They're investing in evidence base. They're starting to address racial disparities, and they raised the age with no negative fiscal impact, right? And so we've got data just an hour or so north of here that we can look to closely where there is reform across the system. And New York has an opportunity to build on that because there's already great things happening here. So we need to get past that. But there are opportunities to do that, bring the school system to the table, bring other folks to the table. At the end of the day, what our young people want are education and jobs, right? So that's got to be part of this conversation.
I just had to jump in and just note that in the era post-Rockefeller drug law reform, okay, which were very much needed, you're diverting more people. No county in the state diverts more drug defendants than Nassau County. Guess what? It was a bait and switch, right? We're going to save all this money because we're not going to incarcerate people. The money didn't go back to the localities, right, to pay for the treatment programs that people needed so that they could stay close to home. And I'm sorry, I'm going to say it. They didn't. It went into the general fund, and we need to call our politicians and say, you know what? That's all well and good that you're saving all this money because the cost to incarcerate is so much greater than the cost of treatment. But if you're not treating them, if you're not giving them money for treatment, then where are we really? It was just a big fake and a hoax. So I shouldn't have said that word because that's pretty broad, but that's how I feel about it. And I have a lot of defendants in my county that are diverted, and there are no programs for them. So that's a cautionary tale for the reform that we need to continue doing for the juvenile justice system, that whatever money is saved, we need to invest the money now. And you have to have the backbone to say, I'm going to invest this money now because I know 10 years from now it's going to come back.
Another question?
Hi, Paige Pierce from Families Together in New York State. We represent families of kids in multiple systems. We heard Mary Ellen talk about, the silos and different systems, and we're talking about it now, about the system and that system, and all these different systems that our kids are in or shouldn't be in or are in or shouldn't be in. There's one system that really crosses over all of it, and it's called the family. And we represent those families. All of our kids are in the mental health system, the juvenile justice system, the child welfare system, the special education system, the health system, all of these different silos. and none of them are addressing together these very kids who we call cross-systems kids. I'm part of a group called the Cross-Systems Commissioners Group. It includes family and youth voice, because the whole premise of nothing about us without us. You know, if you want good policies that are going to affect stakeholders, ask the stakeholders what is needed and include us in the development of those policies. And we're part of the Refuge New York, which there's stuff in your packet, and there'll be people from our group talking later. But I just would encourage, as we have this conversation, that we stay away from the silo discussions, because so often those silos create the barriers to have overarching kinds of policy change that will make a big difference.
I would just add to that two things. Again, in the spirit of you're not really the innovators, there are jurisdictions across the country that have crossover courts within their juvenile courts. And again, there are models that can be looked to. The other thing that I would also say is that the American Bar Association right now is actually developing standards for crossover youth, so that there will be a set of standards and principles that can guide some of this work going forward. You don't need to create it, you just need to find it.
New York City is actually doing crossover work right now in our Bronx court and soon our Brooklyn court, so we're doing the work.
Other question?
Hi, Emily Tao Jackson from the Tao Foundation. Mark mentioned the Raise the Age success in Connecticut, and one of the most outspoken groups against raising the age in our state was the law enforcement community, and so I'm curious from the district attorney where she sees the prosecutors coming out on this, and whether you could use the chance that you have while you're in this leadership position and you've had such amazing success in Nassau County to sort of lead the conversation amongst the community so that we don't have that kind of opposition in New York.
Well, I'm a member of the Raise the Age Coalition, and never before, in my opinion, has it been so united in an atmosphere that is so as open as it is this year with the governor and head of the Court of Appeals that we have. I am, as I said, the president of the DA's Association. This is going to be a heavy lift. I'm just being honest with a lot of my members, most of whom are much more conservative, upstate DAs. But that's why I wanted my adolescent diversion part to be as comprehensive as it was, because you can't, numbers don't lie. And it's very difficult to make a public safety argument when I have done this in my county with no risk to public safety whatsoever. And so that's the tool that I want to use to kind of, in a gentle way, bring my colleagues along if I can. But as I said, it's going to be a heavy lift. But that's why I think it's also important to encourage doing things like ADP parts, because until we get legislation, which obviously would be the best case scenario, there are ways to implement the results of what legislation would give us right now. And that's why I took part in this whole adolescent diversion part. I think that we as a society throw kids away like that. The second they indicate that they are having issues, they're marginalized. And there's no way to get them back in once they're marginalized, or if you want to say silent, And I don't know, maybe it's a product of me being one of 10 kids and feeling like I was never heard growing up and having to run for the dinner table just to have sustenance. I am very sympathetic to how important it is to build, to support our young kids. They are our future, and shame on us if we can't do this now.
Another question? We have a few more minutes? Yes.
Sorry, it's not a question, but I have to respond to some of this.
Just put a question mark at the end.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jeff. So I do want to answer some of the questions in terms of that have risen in terms of what's the conversation and why hasn't New York State raised the age. And we have to be real about the conversation in terms. There's a lot of concrete conversations going on, and it comes down to two different things. And it comes down to legislative strategy, and it comes down to also implementation caveats. And I echo a lot of what actually, I'm sorry, I said actually, I'll just be real in terms of, Nassau County, Ms. Rice said, the implementation is important. And I don't have time to go through all the examples, but in terms of, let me just put the elephant in the middle of the room. So we could put out legislations right now, but it's not just the DAs and law enforcement. There's plenty in our community not ready for the full-fledged reform that we need. We will talk all this rhetorical stuff, and I mean best intentions in terms of we need to, I'm sorry, like our kids, right? Like would this happen if it was our kids? There's politics. If you're talking about legislation, you're talking about Albany. So we talk all this, and when it goes to Albany, it's a trade-off. And who gets thrown under the bus is the so-called youth charged with violent offenses, without looking at the quantitative and qualitative data about what those violent offenses are, which we all know. Vast majority of them, rob 3, rob 2, no small potatoes, but they do not need to be going through what they're going through in terms of being charged as violent felonies.
So try to make it a question.
So I would love to put to the panelists the question of, so there's 2 proposals, right? In terms of, okay, let's win this thing this year, but like winning at what expense, right? In terms of, for us, the question is, how do we do this? How do we raise the age right? We can pass a legislation maybe tomorrow, and it's in implementation, it's gonna leave us far behind because we did trade-offs. So the other proposal, as painful as it is for many of us, is to put forth a task force strategy, which has been used in other states, not just to get law enforcement on board, but also to get our community members on board, who get co-opted and appropriated for throwing the so-called violent offenses under the bus, violent youth under the bus.
Okay, so the question I heard was, what's the next step? You do a task force, how do you get moving on this? How do we make a change?
So, you know, I'm all for task force, working groups, whatever they're called, people sitting together talking, but I really do feel the time for talking is done. I feel like I know you think it will create buy-in. I know you will, I understand you mean implementing, but all I'm gonna say is, this is less complicated than we make it. And we make it complicated because some people don't want to do it. And, you know, I'm listening to DA Rice talk and thinking, wow, that's fantastic. I rarely like a DA. I kind of like her, you know? But I'm thinking, I've sat in rooms with plenty of DAs where this has not been the conversation. So yes, do we need to get them on board? But we do plenty of things in New York State when people are not on board. We don't need everyone on board. We just need a mass number of people yelling out, and we need people from the communities yelling out. We need people like us in this room yelling out. But I don't think we're ever going to get everyone on board. And here's the thing, too. We can go for less. Sometimes less is more. I don't think in this situation less is more. I think we have to go as far as we possibly can, and it's further, even though this court sounds fantastic, it's further than this type of court. Right? This does not do enough. We need to do more. Much like close to home, I feel like we get one bite at this big apple. We are not innovators. Let's bite the apple big. Let's take a huge bite and get it done, because it makes sense everywhere. It makes sense economically. It makes sense for public safety. It makes sense in every way. Data, research, conversation. There's plenty of us who all know this. I don't think we should go halfway. I think we should move it really forward. And I think we make a mistake if we accept less.